So thank you, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for our hosts for having us on. I'm glad to be talking about pay-as-you-save, my favorite topic. I'm sure many of you have already heard me talk about this over the last few months. But I thought there's an interesting nexus that we can bring to it today. Particularly making use of this massive screen, I noticed that from GCMD, we're mostly scientists and engineers, and speaking to a room full of financiers and lawyers, the one thing we probably have in common is a love of graphs. So let's make good use of this and look through the lens of real-world data, real-world ships, to see what it takes to actually deploy a pay-as-you-save financing model on board a retrofit project. So we're going to focus in on one or two ships that we've been working on for the last year, things like wind assistance, retrofits, and air lubrication as well. And we'll see how, from our opinion at least, technology is not the problem, R&D is not the problem. There are many problems, but the solution also doesn't come from technology or R&D. We believe that the solution has to come from smart financial engineering to unlock these kinds of retrofits. And that's what we've been working on with a few partners. Now I'm massive. Nobody wants that. So I'll add a bit of context against what we've been hearing about over the last couple of days as well, which is the IMO net zero framework, the regulations that we hope will be approved in the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks now. Because it's shaken things up a lot. It's changed the story for decarbonisation, it's changed the story for fuels, for energy efficiency technologies, for even by ship types. And what we're starting to see in the market is that ship owners are well aware of this and perhaps holding back a little bit until these regulations are finalized, but it's going to change a lot. And so broadly, how this rather complicated outcome of political negotiations works is as this graph shows us. Depending on basically the fuel that your ship uses, you determine your carbon intensity of that fuel. And then you plot that on the y-axis. So depending on how much the intensity of your fuel, all different fuels you use over the year, is where you end up. And if you're in that upper dark blue region above the base target, you're liable to be paying a $380 tax per ton of carbon emitted on that component. So that's more than $1,000 per ton of fuel in the case of HFO. So that is very clearly there, and that number of 380 is very clearly there to disincentivize being in that position on that y-axis. You become simply uncompetitive if you're paying $1,000 more on fuel than a competitor in the market. Then you have the second region, the $100 fine. And this is if you've kind of tried a bit and you've avoided some of your intensity. You're perhaps blending in some biofuels or energy efficiency. And then it's a bit unclear what the right approach is. Maybe it's good to just pay that $100 and pay a little bit and pollute a little bit, or maybe it's better to try and avoid that. That's something that the market's going to have to figure out over the next few years as those regulations get introduced, and also the regulators are going to have to respond to and adjust. And then lastly, you move into regions of surplus and even rewards if you're really in the net zero space. For GCMD, we look at this very importantly and see how we can apply different solutions and how the industry can respond to this, of course. We work in the biofuel space, where biofuels is an option of kind of riding that wave and coasting down those lines by blending in just enough biofuel to avoid that intensity limits. We think carbon capture plays a role here as well, even with the conventional ships, and of course the green fuels, ammonia and so on. I'm going to talk about the energy efficiency piece, because here is where we're starting to see a very different approach emerging. So energy efficiency can play two roles in this net zero framework. If it's a pure conventional energy efficiency, you're just using a bit less fuel, then of course you emit a bit less carbon. And so you're in this space where your intensity doesn't change, the position on the graph, but the size of your fines goes down. So if you save or you use 5% less fuel, you pay 5% less taxes. So that's good. Obviously, that incentivizes efficiency in the conventional sense. But what we also see is how the regulations are written it accounts for net zero energy sources. So this doesn't just mean efficiency. This means that wind assistance, solar, and things like that start to play a different role. What we talk about as energy efficiency is actually an energy source, a net zero energy source. And that has a very different effect if we look on the graph on the right, because it doesn't just affect the size of the emissions, it changes your intensity. So being able to blend in a bit of a net zero source like wind assistance, for example, can allow you to drop down. And by dropping down on that graph, you can move from that $380 fine into a $100 or even a surplus unit or something like that. And that has a profound outsized impact on the amount of taxes that you might be paying. Of course, the regulations are not crystallized. As with always, we're beginning to get clarity from the IMO, but things are not certain yet. But this is the way we see it going, and there's still some political discussions of exactly how this is going to be implemented. But what we do realize then is that energy efficiency is going to play a big role. If it hasn't already, we're going to see more incentives for more types of efficiency technologies, and we're going to see that there's going to be a larger uptake of these. We tried to have a look together with our partners at actually what size is that? What are we talking about here realistically? How big do we actually have as an opportunity? And we look at the global fleet. And we know from the 2008 to 2012, deliveries of ships was at a peak. We were seeing thousands of ships coming out the yards every year. Those ships, that huge peak and the years after, are very much still in the fleet. They will absolutely be in the fleet by 2030 when these targets are coming in and when we have all these taxes being applied. These kind of ships are the prime targets for retrofits. Slightly older means they were designed slightly less efficient, so they're probably consuming a bit more than the modern tonnage, which also means that efficiency adds more value to them. But we also know that given what we've all been hearing about over the last few days, the backlogs in shipyards and the crunch on delivering new ships for the next few years, these ships are absolutely not going anywhere. And so while we might not have to worry about these much older vessels that are probably going to be scrapped in the next few years, this big chunk have definitely got the 5, 10, 15 years of operating life where it makes sense to be more efficient. So these regulations build a business case, basically. What we have is an efficiency technology which avoids carbon taxes is effectively a saving. It's not just fuel savings that we now have to hedge on and we have to hope for to build up a business case. We have two different components. In fact, not just two, we have many because we have many different regulations. We have the ETS, we have the Fuel EU Maritime, now we have the IMO, maybe we'll have others coming in or hopefully not. But we have different layers of savings. So we're looking through the lens of a very real ship. This is a LR tanker, which will hopefully be dry docking next year to install wind assistance. And we've looked at the cost of the projects and across the different manufacturers. It's a pretty big ship, so it's going to be around $5 million to carry out this retrofit. We then look at how long is it going to take to pay back. And this is a very simplified look at the payback period, not considering cost of capital, just purely looking at the different components of savings in a couple different scenarios. In the first, this is if in 3 weeks' time we have good news from the IMO and the regulations all kick in exactly as we are expecting. We start to see different chunks of savings every year. Of course, that light green, the actual fuel you're saving, is a strong component and it's very important. But the darker bars, the dark blue and the dark green and the very light blue, those are all savings from different regulations. So avoiding a carbon tax in the IMO, avoiding ETS costs, avoiding Fuel EU fines as well. And so in a world where the regulations are strong and all of them come in, payback can be very, very quick. We're saving almost $1 million every year. That's real, a really strong business case for something that's actually designed to last 10, 15, 20 years. If the regulations don't work out, we're looking at the graph on the right, this is if a total failure at the IMO happens, let's hope not, but that regulation simply doesn't exist. Then it's a tougher case for this particular ship, right? We're still reliant on those fuel savings, the small green bars, and a little bit of the patchwork regulations. So the regulations do build that foundation. Once we have certainty that these regulations are coming in and that these carbon taxes will apply, we have certainty in this business case. But the one thing we really don't know, even though I simplified it here, is what that light green bar actually looks like, these fuel savings. We hear claims that wind assistance will save 20% or air lubrication will save 5%, but actually what do we really see? Well, it looks very, very clear here because this graph is, again, massive. But this is an attempt to say that it's quite hard to see what those fuel savings are in real life. This is an MR tanker, which has wind assistance installed since May this year, where we've fitted a lot of sensors and been doing a lot of quantification of those savings. What we see is very similar to if you're riding a bicycle. If you're going up a hill, you're putting in the work and you might be riding at a constant pace, but it's harder, right? It's tougher on your legs. You're having to put in more power from your muscles, and you're not getting that pace going up. Once you come over the crest of the hill and you start going down, you feel it easier in your legs. You might be moving at the same pace, but it's easier in your muscles, and also your bike could pick up speed. You start to see slip effectively between the pedals and the speed. A ship is no different. We isolate this effect out by doing a 1-hour test. We turn the system off, the wind assistance, and then we turn it on for half an hour. And we look at those two different components of savings to see what do we actually reveal. We see the power delivered by the engine. So that's the dark blue bar at the dark blue line at the top, which is working really hard when the wind assistance is off, this red component. So it's up there at nearly 3,000 kilowatts coming out the engine. As soon as we turn that wind assistance on, the engine feels the thrust of the ship coming through the wind assistance, and it eases off. It gets easier. It's equivalent to going down the hill on your bike. And so that comes down. Power from the engine suddenly goes down, fuel consumption goes down. But we get a second effect. The ship speeds up as well. This yellow line, we're cruising along at 12.9 knots with the system off, but the moment we turn it on, we suddenly get a spike in the speed of the vessel. So we pick up almost 0.2, 0.3 knots of speed. The ship gets to its destination faster, it's more economically productive, we're creating value in a different way. The problem with this is most people, most manufacturers, will never show you graphs like this. We'll never be fully transparent on how we measure those savings. And so it's very difficult to build a business case on hypotheticals and hope for what the system should be delivering. We're, of course, doing our best to try and shed some transparency, but I also think the class societies are doing work here and others to share this kind of transparency and approach. And I think it's an incredibly important mechanism that we need when we're looking to drive these investments. What still doesn't change across one of those tests is that the next day it might look completely different, right? Because the wind changes. Unfortunately, we can't control the weather. We can control everything else about the ship and the speed and the power and the crew and where it goes and everything, but the weather is simply uncontrollable. And so we have to deal with that risk, that uncertainty, somehow. On the left-hand side, this really big graph is showing us the range of savings that we've encountered over the last 5 months on board this ship. So it's been trading predominantly the US Gulf, a little bit transatlantic. We've seen savings that sometimes we get those headline numbers of 20%, the thing we all hope for, the thing that would give us the 2-year payback. Sometimes we get the opposite. We even get drag being caused when the conditions are not good. Typically, we're around that 5-6% on average. This just shows us that there's high variance in the results. There's high spread. It's not easy to say, for the next year, I'm going to hope I'll get 10%, because realistically, look at it, it doesn't give you something that clear. But what we can do is we start to build a profile of how the system responds to specific conditions. Rather than just hoping for 8% all the time, or 10% or 4%, we start to craft an image of, given the kinds of routes that the ship might be sailing on, given the kinds of weather that we're expecting to see, what are the kind of savings that we'll be generating? And this feeds into our pay-as-you-save approach, because we start to be able to be predictive in what our savings are based on our historical data. So on the right-hand side, this is showing a polar chart. Effectively, your ship is right in the middle of that 360-degree circle. What it plots is where the wind is coming from. So if you're facing forward, you're always facing up. If at 90 degrees, it means the wind is coming to you exactly beam on your ship. And as you move outside of that circle towards the edges, that's higher wind speed, right? So what we start to see is, as we expect, wind assistance works really well when you get wind from the side of the ship and at high speed, because it's effectively working like a wing on an airplane where you're generating lift in a 90-degree angle. And so we start to see there's also conditions where it's not very good. Towards the head-on direction, it's sometimes causing drag, it's sometimes not doing anything. That's probably not worth using it. It tells us, if you can, find wind which is always on the beam, but that's pretty hard to do, as we know. But it begins to tell us what's the probability of actually finding the savings that we are hoping for. So pay-as-you-save feeds into this because it manages that weather uncertainty. We can't control the weather. We can kind of monitor it, we can track it, we can predict it, but we still have to deal with it. And so we asked ship owners for the last couple of years, would something that has an investment tied directly to the actual savings you generate help? Would it help you de-risk that investment if you don't have to pay for it, and if you only pay back the actual savings to a third-party investor? And of course, we say, who would say no to that, right? Of course, it's attractive, no upfront cost, and basically no risk if the wind assistance isn't working very well. So conventionally, we've always known pay-as-you-save is a nice idea. We know that it could work in the building sector where it's been deployed on efficiency retrofits. We know it works well in the power generation sector where people have used it for solar farms. But we don't necessarily know how it works for shipping and how we deal with all this complexity of where the wind is going to be and what the weather is going to look like and how well can we control that and how well we can deal with that. So what we do have is a slightly different approach. It's not going to work when we do this to just one ship, right? If we develop a pay-as-you-save model and we give that investment to a single ship owner and that ship then doesn't sail in a good condition, it means somebody's going to be losing out, right? Be it the ship owner, the technology provider, the financier, if they take on that risk, somebody's going to be losing out. But when we deploy this at fleets of ships and at scale, we suddenly start benefiting from diversification and blending and multiple projects happening at the same time. And the laws of average kick in, where we no longer have that huge spread of data, we start getting controlled and finer and more close to what we predict. This is particularly then addressing a point for the smaller ship owners, for the SMEs of the world, because they get hit twice with these investments. Not only is there high risk and potentially high loss for the SMEs, they don't necessarily know how this technology works, but a $5 million retrofit on one ship and maybe doing this on 5 is a big upfront CapEx cost as well. I know we're all doing well and everyone in this room is very, very flush with cash for the last few years, but a $30 million, $40 million retrofit package for SMEs is still a significant component. So pay-as-you-save or a financing model that can support them can help them in both those ways. It relieves that CapEx burden, but it also takes on the risk of the weather and shares that risk between them. How we think we can scale this up and how we can go big with this, it comes down to two things. One is blending finance, and the second is diversification. So if we pull together many, many projects and many, many different weather conditions, we start to average out, and we start to see performance quite close to what we hope for. But that doesn't take away the risk. It kind of shares it out and it packages it up. We then need to find the right investors, find the right appetite for where that risk goes. And that's where blended finance comes into this. It will never be the role of conventional debt to take on weather risk. But we are starting to see that there is appetite from catalytic financiers, from philanthropic, from ECAs who are designed to take on risk, from governments, from subsidies, potentially from the IMO, who can absorb just a little bit of that risk and catalyze in more and more investment. So what we're doing is a bit of approach laid out here. We look at each and every one of those projects and we simulate all the risks associated with them. We go through that data, we build up those charts, we understand the routing profiles of those ships. We roughly can predict what we think those savings are going to look like. We do that across many and we package them all up, and then we equally find a capital structure that simulates, that kind of mirrors that component of risk across those projects. We find good old senior finance who can come in, hopefully very cheap, and deliver competitive finance, but without taking on much risk. And then we move up that stack. We find mezzanine and equity providers and catalytic providers who can take on more and more of that risk, but by just putting in a little bit of money, they can also take on slightly higher returns, but they find that way to manage that risk as a portfolio. It then equally unlocks another big problem for retrofit financing, which is that we don't have mortgages over these ships. We don't necessarily have security over these ships. And so again, blending through different investors who some may be less concerned and can take on an equity position or even a first loss position, allows others to come in and have a little bit more security, a little bit more guarantees put in place that at least gives them preferential treatment. So this is how we think we can make this work. We've been working on something for a while with many of the partners, many in this room, on how we think we can package up a portfolio approach effectively through a fund. We're looking to work with ship owners for sure, who will be undertaking these kind of energy efficiency retrofits. We'll work with the manufacturers as well to understand the performance of those technologies, to carry out all those simulations, to work on the data. But then equally, we mirror this pay-as-you-save across the investors. So we will have pay-as-you-save payments coming in. We'll have some of the fixed payments as well coming in. But we find a capital stack and we build up a fund portfolio based on investors who can tolerate different levels of risk so that we can benefit from that diversification of projects, and we can blend in the right kind of investor appetites. Of course, we all hope for massive returns, but let's see. Let's get this going and then see where we are. So thank you very much. We have plenty of reports if you'd like to scan our QR codes and read a little bit more about this, and I'm happy to take some questions after as well. Thanks.